Well, this was a long time coming. Let's do it. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or really just Raiders of the Lost Ark as it was called originally, which from here on out I'm just going to call it Raiders because it's shorter. So Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in 1981, was directed by Steven Spielberg, produced by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and the script was written by Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote the best scripts of the Star Wars movies. And this movie is just awesome. And I'm not really sure how I'm going to tackle this review because I love this movie so much. And I love the whole franchise as a whole, but this one in particular really is the best of the franchise. I don't know, we'll see when I get to reviewing Last Crusade if that's better. But after watching Raiders of the Lost Ark just now, I love this movie because not only is it fun adventure, it has some great introductions to characters and great action and great set pieces, great directing. It's just an all-around great movie. And on top of that, it is responsible for revitalizing the action-adventure genre. Without Indiana Jones, you wouldn't have Jungle Cruise, you wouldn't have Pirates of the Caribbean, you wouldn't have Romancing the Stone. You wouldn't get all these globe-trotting adventure stories that we have now without Indiana Jones to bring it back. So let's dive right in, because this movie opens with one of the most perfect openings to any movie ever. Am I hyping it up too much? Maybe, but this is such a textbook definition of how to introduce a character and a world and a tone that it should be taught in film classes across America. It's that good. Because as the movie opens up, you're in the jungle, it's 1936, you're following these three treasure seekers or something. You're not really sure who they are, but there's this one guy in a fedora that has a very striking silhouette that you assume he's the leader. He's the one with the map. He's the one that kind of knows what's what. He doesn't react to much, where the other guys are very expressive and reactive. And they may be in a little over their heads, but this guy in the fedora, he's cool, he's collected, he knows exactly what's up. And when one of the guys turns a gun on him, he breaks out his whip, whips him in the hand, the gun goes flying, and you see Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones for the very first time. And this opening is so great because it's a reveal by pieces. You see him with the map, you see him with the whip, you see his silhouette, you see all these pieces and aspects of him, but you don't see his face and you don't really know what's up with him until you see the face and all is made clear that this is the guy you're going to follow throughout the entire movie. And from then on, Indiana Jones and Alfred Molina as Cepito go into this cave and they spring and avoid certain booby traps, and there's a wide variety of them just in this one tunnel. But Indiana Jones isn't scared. He sees through all the traps, he avoids them flawlessly, guides Cepito through, and then they come across the idol, the Javito's idol, this golden dude. But it's at this point where, you know this scene, it's the switcheroo with the idol and the sandbag, and you know, it's not quite the right amount, so he lets out some sand, but then when he switches it, the thing goes down, and the whole temple comes crashing down on him, and he's got to make a break for it, he's booking it. And what's so cool about this scene is that going into the cave, Indiana Jones is so collected and confident and knowledgeable, and he sees through all the traps, but as soon as he steals that idol, everything comes crumbling down. And it's here when you realize that Indiana Jones is not Superman. He's kind of just putting on a front, and he's only surviving by the skin of his teeth. You see Cepito trick him into giving him the idol for the whip, but he doesn't even give him the whip, so Indy needs to jump this big cavern, which he does barely, and you are impressed like, oh, Indy's got some athletic ability here. But he grabs onto this vine, and in a normal action movie, he'd grab on the vine and pull himself up. But here, either Lawrence Kasdan or George Lucas or Spielberg or somebody had the idea where, no, we're not going to make it easy for Indy. He's going to grab this vine, and it's going to start slipping, and he's going to start falling back, and you see it on his face, the fear and mortality that's in him. And because of that, the further he gets out of this cave and the more traps that he springs that he didn't mean to spring, you start to relate to him. You see more humanity in him. He's not this stoic, put together, can never do wrong kind of adventurer stereotype. No, he's a real guy, and he will die if he's not careful. So Indy gets out relatively unscathed, but then he comes face to face with Belloc, played by Paul Freeman. And Belloc is the shadowy reflection of Indiana. Indiana is a Tomb Raider archaeologist kind of guy, but he's also a professor, and he's a fairly upstanding man. He's got a moral code to him. But Belloc has none of that. He's slimy, he's got no moral standings, and he'll cheat and lie his way into getting whatever he wants. And he'll even go so far as to work with the devil himself, or maybe the closest thing to the devil in 1936 to claim his prize. And it's here where Belloc takes the idol from Indy, forcing Indy to make a mad dash for the lake where there's a plane waiting for him, and Jock is fishing and he has to choose between starting up the plane and getting a fish. That's just a great little comedic moment to lighten up the tone, because so far this has been a pretty intense opening. There hasn't been a lot of jokes so far. It's been fairly straightforward and serious. But regardless, Jacques starts up the plane, they hop in, and they are free to go back to America relatively empty-handed. And it's here where we learn something very important. Indiana Jones hates snakes. More on that later. So now that whole opening adventure scene is over, we get to see what Indiana Jones is like when he's not in South America looking for treasures. He's a college professor of archaeology. Go figure. And after his class is over, Marcus Brody, his friend and colleague, tells him that there's some people from the government here asking questions about him and they want to see him. So they go and meet Porkins from Star Wars and this other guy, who tell them that the Nazis are looking for Tanis, and they've mentioned Abner Ravenwood by name and the staff of Ra. They have no idea what any of this is about, because if there's something you're going to pick up in this movie, the government is a bunch of idiots. Because Indiana Jones basically has to spell it out for them what the Ark of the Covenant is, which is this gold box that the Hebrews made in the Old Testament of the Bible to carry around the stone tablets, among other things, but it's the stone tablets that they really emphasize in this movie. And in order to find the hiding place where the Ark of the Covenant is kept, you have to first get the headpiece of the Staff of Ra, that if you put it in a certain room at a certain time of day, the light will hit the crystal and show you a beam exactly where the Ark is, because there's a map of the city on the floor. So that was a lot of exposition, but the short of it is that now the government wants Indiana Jones to find the headpiece so that he can find the Ark of the Covenant before the Nazis do. Pretty simple plan. And since it's been established that Indy had a previous relationship with Abner Ravenwood, the dude mentioned in the Nazi telegram, he's going to go to Nepal and find him and hopefully get this headpiece. But when he gets to Nepal, he doesn't meet Abner, he meets Marion Ravenwood, Abner's daughter, who Indy used to date, and I know there's a story there, but the movie only vaguely hints at it, and we never really get the full picture, but you know that at least they dated, and they had some falling out which caused a rift between Indy and Abner. So that's why they hadn't talked for 10 years, and Abner's dead, and Marion is keeping up this dive, and she's played by Karen Allen. And I love Marion in this movie. She is great. She's the best girlfriend Indiana Jones has ever had, because she isn't just a damsel in distress or a femme fatale like in the others. She is an active partner in Indiana Jones's quest to find the Ark of the Covenant. Because she's tough, she doesn't take anybody's BS, she's a fighter, she's resourceful, and she's the type of person that can verbally spar with Indiana Jones and get jabs in and get jokes in, but also take the punches when they come. It really feels like a back and forth, that there's a lot of give and take, and it does help develop this blooming relationship that happens throughout this movie. So all that being said, Karen Allen does a great job, and she may be one of the best actors in this movie, if not the best, because she has so much to work with. But this unwelcomed reunion quickly devolves into a gunfight as the Nazis come barging in, and they want the headpiece too, so obviously Indy comes back and he starts shooting up the place catches on fire. It's a really great action scene, and there is a significant amount of people on fire and blood. And I want to take this moment to really talk about the violence in this movie, because this is one of those movies that really pushed the envelope as to what a PG movie was allowed to do. And it's really this movie and its sequel, Temple of Doom, that made the MPAA create this PG-13 rating, which for better or worse exists and has fundamentally changed the way movies are made now. Because Indiana Jones really is a parental guidance suggested movie, which I feel like a lot of people forget that's what PG means. PG does not mean, oh, it's G just with maybe an innuendo. No, PG used to mean something. It meant that as a parent, you should screen this and decide if it's something that your kid can handle, because there may be things in it that are more mature. And Indiana Jones is a perfect example of this. There's not really that much that's objectionable in terms of sex and nudity and even language. It's pretty mild, but the violence can get a bit extreme, so really it's up to a parent's discretion whether or not their kid should watch the movie. So back to the story. So this dive burns to the ground completely, so Indy and Marion are partners now. They're saddled together and they have to go, and with this headpiece of the Staff of Ra that Marion has kept, go find the Ark of the Covenant. So they go to Cairo and meet Salah, played by John Rhys Davies, and he is a breath of fresh air in this movie, because he is the comedic relief in the perfect way that John Rhys Davies does comedic relief, because he's at the same time relatable and hilarious, and he's not too cartoony, but you can tell that he's kind of lived this blessed life with his big family, and now the Nazis are here and there's a lot of fish out of water stuff going on, and it's just a good time whenever Salah's on screen. And it's here in Cairo where the movie kind of slows down a little bit. There's not as much fast-paced action. There's still action for sure, and there's a great fight scene in the square where Marion hits a dude with a frying pan. It's just amazing. But then there's this whole fake out where it looks like Marion died and Indy's depressed, and he goes and talks with Belloc, and they have a admittedly pretty cool conversation, but I can't help but feel like that kind of brings the movie down a bit, only for her to reveal a couple scenes later that, yeah, she's alive again, Indy's happy, they reunite. And it's this scene that kind of excuses the fact that this is kind of a cheap fake out with Marion dying, because you know that she's not actually dead. They wouldn't kill off Marion as soon as she gets to Cairo, so you know immediately that there's no way that she's really dead. But it's this scene where Indy returns from being in the map room and he uses the Staff of Ra, and it's this epic scene, and now he knows the real location for the Ark, where he finds Marion and he doesn't rescue her. He starts to untie her, but then he pauses and then puts the gag back on her mouth and tells her that if I let you go, they'll start combing the place for us, because obviously now you're a target and that's where all the Nazi effort's gonna go. But if you stay there, I can just go steal the Ark when no one's looking. And that's exactly what he does. He gets a crew together with Salah and they excavate the Well of Souls, and they look down and it's a whole bunch of snakes. So remember what I said about Indy being afraid of snakes that would come back into play? Well, this is how it comes back into play. And there's a couple ways to look at the presence of snakes being in the Well of Souls, but regardless of your interpretation, has a great payoff here because it humanizes him. It gives him real stakes. It keeps Indy on the back foot, that not only does he have to go into this dark cave that looks really intimidating, it also has its worst fear in there. So it doubles the challenge and the bravery that it takes to go in and get the Ark out. But then it begs the question, why are there all these snakes in the Well of Souls? Well, the simplest solution would be, oh, it's because it's Cairo, it's Egypt, and asps and cobras, they are native to Egypt, and it would make sense for there to be snakes, especially those specific kinds, to be in the Well of Souls, because it's Egypt. It just makes sense. But I tend to look at it as, no, this isn't a coincidence. I believe that God put the snakes in there to try to deter Indy from getting the Ark of the Covenant, because if this wasn't made clear by now, God pretty much exists in the Indiana Jones universe, and as we'll talk about in the other movies, other gods do too. But in this movie we're talking about Old Testament Jewish tradition, so it makes sense for the Hebrew God to not look too favorably on Indy and the diggers and what they're doing, because there are all these little hints that there are spiritual forces at work here. For instance, when they were digging up the Well of Souls, the clouds were getting really intense. There was lightning and thunder, and it just looked not good. And even earlier when they met the old man and he had to translate what was on the Staff of Ra headpiece, and when he finished reading it, you hear the wind blowing and the wind chimes are activated, and you have the amazing Ark of the Covenant theme that John Williams composed play in all these scenes. It's this really ominous, spiritual, kind of supernatural, almost poltergeisty vibe that I get from this music. It's awesome, and it inspires the religious terror that getting near something as valuable and dangerous, again, if you know the Bible, you know that just touching the Ark can cause immediate death. And this music conveys that emotion perfectly. So now Indy and Salah are going down into the Well of Souls and they get the Ark of the Covenant. But now we have to move on to what Marion's doing. So Marion, again, being left behind by Indy, tries to make her own escape attempt, which fails, but you at least respect her for trying. And it was a pretty clever tactic of changing her clothes and then using the clothes to hide the knife, only to whip it out and threaten Belloc with. But then she got caught by the Nazis, and now she's in the Well of Souls with Indy, and Belloc seals them in, and now it looks like they're gonna die together, surrounded by all these snakes. But this is an Indiana Jones movie, you gotta have daring escape. So Indy goes on top of this giant statue, pushes it into this wall which collapses, and there's a little brick that's loose, and there's all these skeletons, which is really cool atmosphere, and they escape. And now the Ark is going on a plane to Germany. So now they gotta stop that. And from here to when they leave Cairo, it is back-to-back action. There is a great action scene on this airplane, and this very muscly German guy that Indy has to fight, where this guy just with one punch knocks Indy on his butt. It's almost a one-punch knockout. And you see it on his face. You see like, oof, that was a punch. That was a big punch. And what's great is that Indy takes a lot of those punches and you really feel like he's on the back foot, which a great Indiana Jones movie, first and foremost, needs to make us respect Indiana Jones with his intellect, but also beat the snot out of him, make him bleed, and make us feel like he could actually die. And this scene does exactly that, because Indy is grossly outmatched by this guy, and it's only when the guy gets caught in the propeller blades and gets chopped up, and you see blood splatter everywhere. Again, you don't see the body, but you see a lot of the blood, which today I think would be like a PG-13 quality death scene. But that fight scene wasn't enough for Spielberg, because during that fight some gasoline caught fire, and now there is a visual ticking clock in the background where you see the flames get closer and closer to this truck and gas station, and everything's gonna go up if he doesn't get Marion out of that plane and out of harm's way before everything goes up in flames. And he does it just barely at the last second, which is great dramatic timing, but it doesn't stop there, because now the Ark is being loaded on a truck to go to Cairo, and now they gotta stop that. So Indy goes and he does his thing with the truck. So now we have this great chase scene with the trucks and the cars as he kind of works his way up to the truck that has the Ark of the Covenant, and he's fighting Nazis, and he's getting wounded, he's getting shot in the arm. He's punching him in his wounded arm, and ow! That just looks so painful, and you really feel for this guy. And then he gets tossed through the windshield over the front of the truck, gets pulled under the truck, uses his whip to attach to the truck, so now he's being dragged by the truck, and he has to work his way back into the driver's seat all over again. It's a really impressive stunt considering that there was no CGI, this was all practically done. So now it looks like Indiana Jones won. They got the Ark, they're getting it onto this ship to go back to England. There's a friendly Captain Katanga who's trustworthy according to Sala. But then shortly after they leave, and Indy has a nice scene with Marion as he's recuperating, and he tells him where it doesn't hurt. And I just love that scene. It shows how much their characters have grown to really like and appreciate each other despite their troubled past. The attraction that first brought them together is still there, even though they're much more world-weary people. And there's a hilarious moment with the mirror being spun around and smacking Indy in the chin, and he lets out one of the most painful screams I think have ever been recorded on film. But their peace does not last long, because the Nazi submarine pops out of the water, steals the Ark, steals Marion, tries to kill Indiana Jones, but Indiana Jones is too crouched for that, so he sneaks on the submarine, goes to whatever island base they're hiding out in, and he basically follows them undercover as a Nazi soldier until he gets them exactly where he wants them, in this canyon, and he has this RPG aimed right at the Ark of the Covenant and is threatening to blow it up if they don't give him Marion, because at this point he doesn't really care that much about the Ark of the Covenant. All he wants is the girl. Because Belloc and Indy's relationship has always been Indy finds something, Belloc steals it. So to him, this is just another loss, and he just wants Marion to be spared from all this misery. But then Belloc calls his bluff and is like, do it, blow up the Ark. Let's see you actually do it. Because I know that you want to see it open just as much as I. This is history. This is everything we've come to archaeology for in the first place. And Indy drops his RPG, which I've been pretty lax about the historical accuracy in this movie because it's pretty solid. You really feel like it's 1936, World War II era. But this RPG is just not World War II era. It might be, but to me this looks like something that was made during the Soviet era and not World War II. So let me know in the comments if that's actually historically accurate, but from what I've seen of World War II weaponry, I don't think an RPG like that was really part of their arsenal back then. But again, I could be wrong. So now Indy's captured because he wasn't willing to blow up the Ark of the Covenant. And now Indy and Marion are tied up as they watch Belloc and the Nazis perform this Jewish ritual, which is one Nazi commander really has reservations about because they're Nazis. They don't like the Jews or anything that's Jewish, which is something that I'm really glad this movie brought up, because I always thought, why do the Nazis want the Ark of the Covenant so badly? Like, they don't want anything to do with the Jews or Jewish culture. They vilified them, they've rounded them up in ghettos, and now they're trying to exterminate them. So why would they be so adamant about the Ark of the Covenant? And I think the way Steven Spielberg sees it, a Jew himself, who has very strong opinions on the Holocaust, I mean, he made Schindler's List for Pete's sake, they also tried to pervert and appropriate their culture, their heritage, and to turn it into something evil that is just so much more pernicious than just killing a lot of people. It makes the Nazis out to be even more evil and racist than just what they did in the Holocaust, which was certainly bad enough to qualify them as monsters. And it's here where Belloc and the Nazis get exactly what they deserve, and it's probably this scene here that made a lot of parents uncomfortable with the PG rating that this was given, because Belloc's head explodes, this Nazi commander guy's face shrivels up into kind of a corpse-like skeleton, and this Nazi spy that we've seen throughout the movie, his face melts like it's made of wax right down to the skull. That's some graphic imagery, and I'm not exactly sure what rating I would give a scene like that, but parental guidance was suggested. But all joking aside, this scene is awesome. The Ark music is in full force. You see the horror and the beauty and wrath of God just laying into these Nazis, and they all die. They all get swept up into the clouds, and the Ark shuts, and everything gets really quiet as Indiana Jones and Marion open their eyes, because they had their eyes shut this whole time. They didn't dare look at the power of God, because I guess that was the secret to surviving this whole experience, because if you humble yourself, you don't even look at it, then there's nothing they can do to you. But the Nazis were not that humble. They wanted to see what was in there, and they paid the price for it. So then as the movie wraps up, Indy's in DC, he's talking with the government again, you know, Porkins and Skinny Porkins, and they tell him that top men are working on the Ark of the Covenant, and Indy and Marcus are very skeptical as to what that means, but the government's not going to tell them what they're actually doing with it. And that just makes him even more uncomfortable, and then he leaves just being so flustered, and he goes out to a drink with Marion. But what are they doing with the Ark of the Covenant? Well, a big fat nothing. And it's in this big warehouse full of other Amazon Prime boxes that look exactly like that one, never to be found again. Which honestly is probably the best place for it. It was lost once, it'll be lost again, and maybe that is what should be done. So the government made a good choice about what to do with the Ark. Credit where credit's due. So that's Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a textbook example of how to pull off a fun, engaging, high-risk adventure story that has multiple locations, multiple set pieces, where in the second half the action does not stop. It's just one thing after another, and with a very exciting and a little graphic climax that ends with the heroes winning and the bad guys defeated. It's great, and the one thing I haven't really talked about yet in this review is Indiana Jones's faith. Because Indy's faith in this movie is an arc that I never really paid that close attention to until watching it this time. I think it does work as an overarching journey throughout all three movies, but we'll see more of that when we get to them. But at the beginning of this movie, Indy makes it very clear that he has no religious affiliations, that he's not going after the Ark because it's a religious artifact. He's going after it because it's a historically significant piece that he can put in a museum and the world can benefit from it. But as the events in this movie unfold and he's witnessed more and more miraculous things that can't be explained, leading up to the climax where the wrath of God is unleashed onto these Nazis, and Indy has the faith in all this chaos to close his eyes and tell Marion to close her eyes, because he believes that that is what will get them through it. Just like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot and his daughters left the city, but his wife looked back and saw the wrath of God on display, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Well, we don't see a lot of pillars of salt in this movie, but we did see a man melt like a candle. I think that's close enough. And then the conversation at the end with the government officials, you can tell that he has a lot more faith in God or a higher power or whatever you want to call it than he did in the beginning of this movie. So in a way, this whole journey for the Lost Ark has been a spiritual journey as much as it has been a fun, campy, throwback adventure to the adventure serials of the 30s. And I'm really excited to see how Indiana Jones's faith is explored in its prequel, Temple of Doom, which is the next one that was made and will be my next video, and then later in The Last Crusade, its proper sequel. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Raiders of the Lost Ark? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.